Let's go and get started.
Mayor?
Manager, got a haircut. You look good.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Probably get called down to HR later for making that comment. Sorry about that. Go ahead.
Notes are being taken. We wanted to have this follow-up because we start the engagement tomorrow with DABS. And what we want to do is, there were some outstanding issues that we'd like to bring back some information for you. And then briefly review what you heard last time and what we heard back from you. And then maybe get some guidance about what you'd like us to be sharing with the DABS, what you'd like to engage. Are there any issues you're kind of on the fence with and you want to get citizen input before we start to finalize recommendations? And that includes not just DAB presentations, but also what we do with social media town hall, what we do with simulators. So we're looking for your guidance in that regard as well. Just a reminder, we still have a gap between things on this list and the amount of ARPA funds that we'll have. So we're going to need your guidance on what we should be looking at to balance out the budget. Not expecting to necessarily do that today, but we'd like your refined thoughts in that regard. Also, there's a new twist, just to let you know that as the infrastructure bill is being considered in Congress, there is a split between the Republicans and Democrats. And Republicans are talking about one way of funding the infrastructure bill could be by withholding the second payment for ARPA for cities and counties. So we may want to think strategically on what we put in phase one this first year and what we put in phase two, knowing that that infrastructure bill will probably get worked through in the next 60 days or 90 days. So we may have to do some contingency planning in that regard. But that was a new development last week as they're trying to get a bipartisan bill, just so you know. There are a lot of things on the table. It's really fluid, but I wanted to bring that to your attention as you think through all this. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Elizabeth and let her walk you through where we are now and some additional information that we got for you. And then again, feel free at any time to jump in.
Good afternoon. This is a relatively short presentation. It's really just some follow-up items from last time. But we do need to circle back on the calendar. And then I've updated the budget outlook slides with the new estimates for the ARPA spending updated from last time. And then we'll walk through some of the updated budget options. We had quite a few questions last week. So we've updated a few of those, and they're in your handout that I put at each of your seats. So with regard to the calendar, the only thing that's different on this slide here is that we've added the meeting today on June 1st. And just a reminder, we will be at DABS tomorrow night, 6:30. So getting ready for that. I wanted to pause on this slide. Last time we talked about moving the August 3rd meeting to August 10th because August 3rd is the primary election. I got this sneaking suspicion about August 10th, and it's actually neighborhood night out. So that's probably, I know my family's excited about neighborhood night out, so you'll probably be there too. So that would be another bad choice for an evening meeting. There's nothing that precludes you all from holding that evening meeting on a Wednesday or Thursday. So that's something to think about, potentially August 4th or 5th or August 11th or 12th. From the standpoint of the budget office, our preference would be earlier rather than later. If there's any feedback from that meeting that you all would like to incorporate into the final budget agenda report.
I do know there are family and church activities on Wednesday for some families, so that may not be the best time. We could try for that Thursday. I don't know how this works out for all of you, but we thought we would throw that out. Again, we've got an extra meeting in here than what we've had in the past, and that was at your request in case issues came up with the budget.
And we can still do it on the 3rd, just do it after the polls close.
The
polls close at 7, correct?
Yeah.
So there's nothing to stop us from doing it at 7 or 7:30.
True.
Just makes it a little late, obviously.
Except for people refreshing their cell phones, wondering what the results are the whole time, but yes.
Yeah, it's kind of an anxious evening for some folks. Might not get as
What if someone found out they lost their primary in here while we're doing this and gets up and walks out?
They better get within the budget what they want.
Jeff, that was clever.
Yeah.
So,
I would suggest Thursday the 5th. That would be my suggestion.
I think we've had an evening meeting on a Thursday before, a few years ago, and I think it worked out okay. So,
Is that the 11th?
The
The
5th.
fifth.
The
Oh,
5th.
yeah.
I would agree with that.
And this is August 5th.
yeah, I'll go back and check wichita.gov and make sure there's not another major civic event going on that night. So,
Yeah, I agree. It's early enough to where the first one was, it gives the public time to digest and give us some feedback, so I support that.
okay.
Okay, that's what, unless there's some other event, we'll go ahead and program it for August 5th.
What time would we start?
7 o'clock? Oh, no, well, that's up to you. Actually, I think we've done 6 before. I know neighboring jurisdictions will, some of them have their council meetings that start at 7. It's up to you, whatever you think. 6, 6:30, or 7,
My thought would be 6:30. Our DAB starts at 6, and not everybody always gets there at 6, just because of folks getting off at 5 trying to get there, so I think 6:30 would be enough time.
If everybody's okay, we can just go with 6:30 then. Okay, 6:30 on August 5th. Great, thank you.
This slide is just a repeat from the last presentation to give you an overview of where the general fund is as forecasted as of last week. And then the impact of that mill levy shift, that would be from shifting $0.5 from the debt service fund to the general fund for a period of time, should we cash fund existing capital projects with ARPA, and then putting in the ARPA reserve for 23 and 24 because we have forecasted deficits for those 2 years. This slide here looks a little better than last time. You'll notice that the options, that as we have them all added up now, add up to 85.9 million, which is a little bit less than last time, but it's still more expensive than the funding we have allocated. And then this next table, it's a lot of numbers, but that is a summary. It's very similar to what's on the top page of the handout. It's just a summary of all of the options by year and by category. So you all asked quite a few questions last time about some of the options. So I'll quickly walk you through what we have learned since then. So on grounds maintenance, what we've learned is that it would improve mowing cycles. What we reduced last time in the budget was mowing cycles and right-of-way, but I think this is a relatively flexible option, and so it sounds like you all could provide some direction on what mowing cycles would be improved. Okay, on the program options, those start on page 4 of your handout. On page 5 is number 12 about the library branch hours. You asked about that. Right now, most of the locations have 60 hours during the school year and 56 during the summer. But presently, Walters Branch has the same hours that Linwood used to have, so that's 35 during the week, and it's the same year-round because they don't have hours on Sunday. And the other branch that is not on the 60-hour-a-week schedule is Angelou, and that branch has 27 hours a week year-round because there are not Sunday hours there. So that's in response to that question. Regarding demolition funding, I checked in with the department, and they were confident that the amount that they requested earlier would get them to year-end. So that was a question we had. With regards to refuse collection, these are right in a row. Number 14, we checked in with the department, and as an alternative, their preference, of course, is to buy the additional truck. But I said, what about an alternative? And they said as an alternative, they'd be more interested in contracting with a third-party vendor to cover some routes so that they could then focus on the emergency cleanups and then other parks. So they would just be dedicating some of the one park collection route to, or maybe multiple routes to an outside vendor. So that's an alternative there that's less costly. On page 4, we have that costed out right now at $50,000, and last time it was, I think, around $300 the first year. And then on property and evidence, which is at the bottom of page 5, number 16, we have put a different phasing in, and so this would be restoring the clerk 2 that was eliminated about 10 years ago, I think, and then adding a service officer, which is a type of position they already have in that location, so increasing their staffing. And the new cost is over on page 4. Okay, operating budget initiatives. On this handout, so initially, the early literacy position was included with service reinstatements because that was a position that was eliminated in 2020. But when we met in April, a lot of people had questions about, are there other agencies that are doing this sort of work? And what we have learned is that Wichita State, the Public Policy and Management Center, actually has received a 3-year grant with regard to early literacy and kindergarten readiness. Right now they're in the process of doing a project inventory. They told me how many organizations are involved in early literacy. It's around 50 to 60. So they're doing a program inventory, and they're also putting a data sharing agreement, getting a data sharing agreement in place with the school district, because the school district is doing a kindergarten readiness assessment in the fall, and they'll be able to use that data to identify where there are gaps in kindergarten readiness. And then from there, they'll have recommendations regarding implementation. So the concept, what you need to know for the sake of the budget, is the concept that is included in here on page 7 is to set aside some budget for program implementation. We don't know what that'll look like because they still have a lot of data to sift through. But partnering with them on that, and as a point of reference, the library is involved on one of their stakeholder committees, so they have a number of those. So I learned a lot. It was really interesting. So that's the update. And number 21, the staffing study. This is just updated to clarify that these 7 officers would be to finalize phase 2. And that adding those 7 officers was deferred when that COPS grant was received last summer. So this language clarifies that situation.
Is this phase 2 or phase 3?
2.
Previous documents.
So that's the update. It's the last 7 positions in phase 2. Okay. And then the last part.
And it's still, I'm sorry, it still costs the same, even though it's only finishing up phase 2, it still costs the same, $700,000 each year?
Right, it's 7 officers.
7 officers.
Yep, it's still 7 officers. We got it clarified this past week. There are grant positions that we originally counted towards completing phase 2, and the chief said that's not really accurate. We went and got those positions to service the Broadway project, if I remember correctly. And so to keep them on course to get phase 2 finished, we need these 7 officers.
Understood. Thank you.
Yep.
Very good. And then the last group of questions that you all had, well, you had plenty of questions were regarding capital projects. So on page 9, on table 7, are some other projects in this that are currently in the CIP that could be funded with ARPA. That was a question that we received last time. So there's some more ideas. And then there were also questions about 3 other park locations that have been in the planning or conceptual phase that are not included in the 21 to 30 CIP, and those are at the table at the bottom of page 9.
Councilmember Fry had asked about the possibility of substituting fire station replacement for the cultural facilities. And so if you look on page 9, fire stations replacement is 3.3, almost $3.4 million. And that's the second line item up in table 7.
And that was for just one fire station.
That's my
It
recollection.
is one.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's a replacement. And yeah, they're staggered through the 10 years. I think there might be one in 25 and 27, yeah. So I think the projects on page 8 were, part of the reason they were picked was just the sizing of it. That's the dollars that would need to be cash funded in order to shift the mill. It's not really a prioritization exercise as much as financial sizing. So if, mix and match.
Can you repeat that again, so I'm understanding what you...
Yeah, so on page 8, those are the projects that we talked about last week, and they total the 23.6 million. And the 23.6 million is a target amount that you would need to cash fund in order to shift half a mil.
Yeah, but I was trying to get on the fire stations, how much is the amount?
It's on page 9,
yeah.
3.375.
For how many fire stations? For one?
One.
And that's in 2000.
So we're delaying that?
No, that's an alternative to the ones on page 8. The top, table 7 at the top of page 9, those are other alternatives that we could use ARPA funding for.
So this is the whole list of things that if we wanted to use ARPA funding instead of waiting until when they're coming up in the CIP.
Yeah, these projects, they're geo at-large projects, and they're in the ARPA period. I think that's. why
Oh, so
they're
we
here.
would keep them in their same year, we would just fund them differently.
You could move them up. I guess it just depends on the capacity to design them and oversee construction and such.
But now, so it was 23.6 last time, and this is an additional, well, an additional 12.6, an additional 40, right?
So,
If we-
yeah,
Am I
it
looking-
really just think of it as mixing and matching different
Okay.
projects to get to 23.6 million. Does that make
Thank you.
sense? It's kind of a, you pick 2 or you pick 23.6 option, right? So, that's the idea there, but they're all, these are all geo projects,
So the swap on 27 goes into all those facilities, is that what we're saying, or trying to figure out?
Yes.
Yeah, that 1.3 is an ongoing number for the next 10 years for those cultural facilities. That maintenance, that work's going to have to be done regardless. So my suggestion was, just go ahead and keep it in the CIP, but instead of using ARPA funding for it, use ARPA funding for the fire station that needs replaced now.
Because it fits in the bucket.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So AKA getting the fire station sooner.
Replacing it soon.
Replacing it.
Replacing it soon.
Okay.
Any other questions about or discussion about the capital projects?
And again, if you wanted to increase from page 9, take a couple more of those projects and add cash flow there, you would get more money in your general obligation budget if you spend, but do we have the capacity to do any more? I think you'd have to take it out of the reserve.
Right, or not, right, that would be one alternative, is if we have underestimated our growth in revenue, and it's 2023 or 2024, and we've underestimated revenue growth and we're balanced, then we could use some of that remaining ARPA funding to cash fund projects, and then look at the subsequent potential mill levy shift then. That's definitely something to consider. Together, that's 12 million, so that would be maybe, instead of a half a mil, that could be more like a quarter of a mil. It's something to consider then. That would be a wonderful situation to be in.
If you don't mind, I'd like Mark to talk a little bit about the philosophy on the reserve, because it's, especially not knowing exactly what's happening in DC. If you could explain your thoughts, especially on sustainability past 22 or 23.
Well, good afternoon again. Yeah, I'm going to flip back to Elizabeth's slide over here. So what we were trying to model on this slide was a baseline where before you did anything with ARPA funding, you would be sustainable for 4 years. That's what this slide shows you. If you spend half the ARPA funding for capital projects and for a reserve for the general fund, you're sustainable for 4 years, and then you've got another 30 or 40 million to layer on top of that. Having said that, if we take out the $12 million ARPA reserve that is shown on this slide, the takeaway for you should be that we will be unsustainable after 2022 before you do anything with ARPA. In other words, that would be our base assumption that we would make. So that's why we, in some of the material we propose, using ARPA funds to stabilize the general fund through 2024. But that'll consume about 12 million of your ARPA funds if you choose to do that.
But again, like Elizabeth just said, if our revenues are better than projected,
Yes,
you
sir.
could take some of that and apply it to cash fund.
Exactly right.
Which also gives us additional general operating dollars.
In the best case, our projections 2 or 3 years out, and it's difficult to make projections that far. So perhaps we're too conservative on assessed valuation growth or sales tax, or I could give you several other options. Maybe we're too conservative. So maybe when we get to 2023, we tell you great news. We don't need $5 million to balance the general fund. We only need $2 million or $0 million. At that time, that would be an extra amount to use. We would recommend probably for additional capital projects or non-recurring things at that time. But yes, it would be available for those purposes.
You could also delay or stage your community initiatives, that 20 million that we talked about, and that would, and you could prioritize that as well, right? So this time next year, you could then visit that list again, and as when we have a much better idea where we are financially.
So that's another idea. You could delay the stage community initiatives to put more towards cash funding, or make it a smaller amount too.
That's correct.
Okay. And again, for every 12 million in cash flow, capital funding, it's about $1 million for the bottom line.
Yeah, that's pretty close. About $250,000, which would be about $1 million.
Okay, I think this is where we were, right? So, I guess we are on a roll in the finance department, short presentations today. So as a wrap up, resident engagement begins tomorrow with DABS. We'll kick off the simulator next Monday. At this point, it would be helpful for us to have direction on the use of ARPA for capital projects. Even if it were conceptual at this point, that would be useful. But just your interest in using the ARPA for capital projects is the kind of direction we're looking for in building the CIP. And then the guidance on the longer term initiatives and the program options, that sort of work. If you'd like, to go out, as the city manager said, if you'd like us to include that in resident engagement or the simulator or the social media town hall, just your preference for how we should proceed with those options at this point. So that is my prepared material for you all.
So Elizabeth, tomorrow when you start the resident engagement, what are we, just in concept, what are we showing them and asking them?
So what we'll have ready for the DAB meetings, and that's a really good question, we will have a budget simulator ready for the DAB meetings that they can participate in as a group, if that's something that you're interested in. I'll open it up just for the group to participate in, and they can do it with their smartphones or tablets or what have you, and then we'll close it, and then we can report out. I guess it really depends on how much you have on your agenda at your DAB meeting. Does that make sense? And then providing a lot of the same content that we've provided already with regard to the overall condition of the general fund. And then, what of these things would you like DABs to be engaged with and provide feedback on and think about? So.
Are we going to ask, in the budget simulator, is it the service reinstatements, program options, operating budget initiatives, capital projects? I mean, are we asking them all those things?
We're trying to get some guidance today.
Okay.
Yeah.
On what you'd like to bring to the public.
I think it will be difficult for DAB if we mix those things together because, for example, these community investments are really big conceptual items that we're trying to get our arms around if we want to, do we really want to try to shift something? As opposed to, so if you put that up against an inspector vacancy, for example, that's difficult to make those determinations. So that's what I'm trying to figure out is.
If you could let me walk you through this, I think I can narrow
That'd be
the
great.
discussion, okay? And then you can give me guidance in that regard.
Thanks.
So if we go to page 2, you pretty much have said, go ahead and fill that list of vacancies that I shared with you at last retreat. So that's a given. And then we can just confirm today, are you comfortable with the service reinstatements that actually date back to not last retreat, but the retreat before that? These are the dollar implications of filling or spending on these 7 categories on page 3. Because if you're in agreement, again, to do this, then we don't need to take that to the DABs either.
I'm in agreement.
On page 3,
Yes.
I scratched tree purchase and tree removal out of 3 and approved everything else. That was my suggestion.
Okay.
I would have difficulty with that just because in my neighborhoods, tree removal, I mean, we're backed up so far that it becomes difficult in District 6 anyway. If we don't take those trees out, it becomes dangerous.
Yeah, same here. The District 1 grant has dried up on that, and we were using that for dead tree removal as well. So that's a service I think we would appreciate in District 1.
But on the other hand, out of all of my scratches, because the number was 15 million last week or something like that we had to eliminate, I think. Out of all of my scratches, I came up 17 million. So, I mean, with my suggestions anyway, I had room to add some back.
Yeah, I think this also dates back 2 retreats in terms of this list and getting some initial nods, but I wanted to confirm. If you're okay with this list, and Councilmember Cirillo, if you're willing to accept that, then I think we've got consensus on these items as well.
I am, thank you.
Okay, all right, so then that takes us to 4. And these are the program options. You have not weighed in on this. You listened before, asked a lot of good questions. So the question is, since these are program options, are there any that you now say, let's not do them, or are there any that you want to take out for public engagement to get more feedback before you make a decision?
I guess I'll make some suggestions again. I scratched diversion clerk, Walters branch hours, forestry equipment, engineering software, and call center staffing pilot. And approved everything else from that list.
Did you say engineering software? Is that what it is? Okay.
Yes.
So how much again are you proposing that we eliminate from these lists? Sorry, was that answering my question? 1 point?
I think, well, you mean all together on everything you've been considering? Oh, I think, well, overall, the entire handout is 13.5 million more than what we have in ARPA funding. But you don't necessarily need to take it from one particular category. You could take it from a variety of different places.
And the highlighted, what's the highlighted?
That
mean?
means there are things that have changed since last time.
The money's
Or I've
changed.
given, the numbers have changed, or there's additional information, or an alternative approach.
And according to my addition, which may or may not be right, that was saving just over 1.1 million from that list.
And you wanted to cut the engineering software, the
The
call center.
diversion clerk, Walters branch hours, forestry equipment, engineering software, call center staffing pilot.
Well, reading through the descriptions, I haven't got to all of the ones Councilmember Cerullo said. I would like to keep the diversion clerk as we look at restorative justice efforts and what's going on with suspended driver's license. I think that's a position that would be necessary to help folks.
Yeah, I agree. I think getting people into diversion who make a mistake when they're young is smart. They're a better chance of getting a job later down the road if they're not.
Without the diversion, doesn't it end up costing us a lot more?
In the long run.
Yes.
I
This-
mean, just.
Right.
in
By
jail
adding this
time.
clerk position, we're able to free up an attorney to do more work on the actual diversions. And we've been looking at diversion alternatives, as the Vice Mayor talked about. And, you know, the mayor has offered a suggestion on another diversion approach, so.
I'm a little bit concerned about cutting the call center. I haven't heard much about it lately, but, you know, that's one thing we do hear a lot about whenever we've had the wait time issues and stuff in the past.
Yeah, so this is a pilot for that, so it would be adding staffing in the short term to evaluate whether, you know, what the impact of that additional staffing means in order to eliminate a lot of the, I guess there's busy signals that customers receive at particular times, so staffing to those peaks.
So
it
if you cut
sounds
the
like we
library
oughta-
hours, what is being cut? Like, how are you cutting the library hours?
Well, this isn't a cut, it just would not be implementing the additional hours,
okay.
right? So the recommendation from the library is to switch from a 35-hour schedule per week to a 48-hour schedule per week. Since it's a bigger branch and has a larger service location than its predecessor, which was the Linwood branch at the rec center.
So it's basically just keeping it the same as what it is now.
No, it'd be adding you'd be adding one full-time staff person to increase hours at Walters.
Right, but if we cut
If we
it,
cut it,
If
it's
you,
status
yeah, if
quo.
it doesn't make the list, then it stays the same.
Yes,
Right,
that's what I
right. It's
meant.
not really a cut, yeah, it's just not adding, right,
Right.
exactly. And then the same would be true with that library position. It's a position the number 11, they don't have the position today. So by not adding it, you're just keeping it as is.
Is the library hours currently at the same standard as other libraries?
That's included in the additional information on number 12, it's on page 5. So Alford, Evergreen, when it reopens, Rockwell and Westlink operate on 60-hour schedules during the school year and 56-hour schedules during the summer.
So if we unified all the libraries under the hours that Walter Branch is currently, would that save more money?
if you moved all the branches from a 60-hour schedule to a 35-hour schedule.
Except for like the main one downtown or something, yeah, where
Yeah, but that would save a lot of money, but what we're talking about is increasing hours at the Walters branch, not decreasing hours at other locations.
right, but we're talking about saving $13.5 million without having a big impact, so I just trying to think outside the box here.
Yeah, we're not really talking about cutting the budget as much as knowing that all of the things that are included in this big document, we have 13.5 million more in dreams than we have.
It's just
Reality.
13.5 million out of these,
This,
not
yes,
the
not
general.
out of the budget.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
right.
Out of dreams, I meant.
Out of dreams.
You're a dream cutter.
There were, yeah, I'm a dream. I kind of, it makes it
And
sound
this
so
is-
awful.
And this is why I like to meet with budget before these meetings to get better update on this, because I think that if we have these choices to make these cuts, like, I'm worried about, after last week's budget retreat, not funding new forestry equipment because of the safety issues. So if it's a safety issue where someone could lose a leg in in old machinery that's no longer safe, I'd rather keep the forestry equipment and then limit some satellite time for libraries, knowing that public transit can take you down to a different library. So I'm a little worried if this is the only thing we have here, is there's a bigger picture we could look at instead of just these items to try to find 13.5 million.
I understand what you're saying, Mayor, but I think in neighborhoods, for the library, for example, in the neighborhoods, you have some transportation issues that people can't, it's not as easy for them as it is for me just to zip across town to go to another library. So I would caution us on thinking about, I would encourage us to think about our neighborhoods and how people interact with those amenities, our pools and our libraries and those options. We've looked at closing libraries before, and we found that the community wasn't in favor of that, and so.
And for some people, that might be
Right,
the only
so-
access to a computer that they have to be able to apply for
That's
jobs or
exactly
communicate
right.
with family members. Or,
Yeah.
So,
Yes.
and I want to make this clear, because I'm not sure if everyone got what I just said. What I'm interested in is to know the bigger picture, particularly when it comes to expanding hours, or can we use a data approach where, people really utilize this library at this time, opposed to, the time when it's open? Is there a way where we could take items that aren't on this list? And I'm not advocating we cut libraries. I'm just using this as an example here because these hours here is only targeting one library opposed to using the entire network of libraries. So if we had a larger perspective of the other items, and the library makes sense because we have lots of, this one is being targeted differently than the other ones that are mentioned in the description here. Are there other things on this that we could be looking at that didn't make it to this list that we could have smarter cuts to if we have to cut 13.5 million? That's more my point than advocating we cut libraries. Can we look at a larger picture of the economic situation and see what would have less impact or noticeable impact?
Yeah, the situation with having the $13.5 million of more in options than we have ARPA funding isn't related as much as to our economic situation as it is just having a very inclusive list in this document. So the only thing that would be related at all to our economic situation would be the usage of the reserve in the last 2 years of the eligibility period. So, and we're not talking about cutting hours at Walters, it's about
not
adding
adding
hours to
hours.
more, yeah. And it's not bringing it up to the same service standard as the other locations, but they did, gosh, time has flown, but there was a pretty involved branch library study maybe 3 or 4 years ago, right after the main location opened, about the branches. And from that's why we have this new location, and we've been doing the capital improvements, and there's a lot of engagement with people in the service area about how they use the locations and what hours they're looking for.
And I don't think the mayor wants a micro discussion about library. I think that's an example. The hours for the branches are pretty well justified through the branch library study that we did. There's a lot of data that talks about the users and the different demographics for each library, and that's how we established the hours. This one just simply recognized, as long as we're talking about the micro issue, it recognized that we're moving into a new facility. We have the ability, we have more in that facility now. So if we expanded the hours, it allows the neighborhood to take better advantage of it. So just this micro issue, if you don't do this, we'll stay with the hours we had at Linwood. If that turns out to not serve the neighborhood well, we can surely revisit that next year. But I know what the mayor's talking about, and that's trade-offs in the budget. If there's something on this list that you think is a high priority, but you want to drill down on other things that are part of the base budget, then that's a little more detailed discussion.
And thank you, that's a better articulation of what I was trying to say, is if we shaved a few hours here or there on different things, could we actually make up an item on this list that would allow us to, particularly with the forestry equipment, for example, after it was presented as our possible health hazard or danger, allow us to keep other things.
Normally I would say, hey, listen, we could push back, some of these equipment purchases. And the reason this is on the list is because of the age of the equipment. And I do get worried when I see, chippers that are 17 and 18 years old and a grinder that's 16 years old. I do worry about the safety for our employees with equipment that is that old.
Yeah, most likely if it became unsafe, we would just take it out of commission and then they wouldn't be able, they just have to do other work. That's what usually happens. And that's well disposed to one-time funding too, because it's a one-time purchase.
So looking at the library position, the circulation position technically is new, right?
11?
Yeah.
Yes.
So I would be okay with cutting that off. I know that property and evidence is important and there's a need there. But if we could push that off, and I agree with Councilmember Blubaugh on the call center deal, and I think all of those is around 900,000. So I'd be okay with those three.
I'm sorry, what was on the call center? What are you saying? Keep that?
Oh, well, I would say cut that.
Yeah, we could push that back a year. I mean, as Councilmember Blubaugh said, it's not like we're receiving a lot of calls. We're just not quite hitting it yet, right? And we're going to have some peak periods that are a problem. And they were offering a new staffing pilot because we've taken care of equipment needs and technology, and we're still not hitting our benchmarks. So the question is, do we need to explore different staffing arrangements? So it's really up to you. I would probably bring it back. If you don't fund it this year, I'll bring it back for next year for consideration to get us on the right track.
Like the call center, I don't have a good pulse on it, other than
Right.
I haven't had any complaints for months.
Right, yeah. I can show our bench.
But they show up real fast.
What I caution you to make cuts in property and evidence. We have audit findings that show a weakness in that, and that's a serious issue if property and evidence walks away, is not properly secured, and we can't do the appropriate accounting for the items that are flowing into that space. So that's. Having seen the findings, that's the reason I agreed to a partial implementation of the chief's recommendations.
Is there not potential, I know we've struggled with hiring, and that's a county issue too, but since we were looking at doing more services with police department that should potentially free up some staff, could that not be an opportunity to take, if we do get more social workers and stuff in, one of those officers that would be freed up to get trained into doing this instead of creating a new position?
It's your call. That would take a person off the street, right?
Because this isn't a police officer who's doing this.
No, this is a community service officer.
The clerk too.
Clerk too, right?
It's a clerk too, and a
Service officer.
a service officer.
And when we saw this last time, it was 1.6 $6 million.
Right, we've dropped it down to just 2 positions, a clerk 1 and a service
Yeah,
officer.
So we've already
Slimmed it.
decreased this ask.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, from 6 positions to 2 positions, I think.
And this is bringing
Yeah,
back the
I
clerk
see.
2 position.
Yeah. Not bringing back, actually, it's hiring 2 that were recommended by the
Yeah.
audit.
I mean, you don't have a clerk 2 position right now, like, so it would be
Yeah, so that
putting
went
back
from
into 614.
1.6
Yeah, it went from 1.6 to.
down to 430, so more than half.
Yeah.
It feels pretty responsible that they were able to kind of come back with a different offer that cuts it in half. Like, I don't feel totally happy messing with that. Seems like they met us there.
Well, from my perspective, it seems that these are programs that these departments have said are important for one reason or another. I heard that the call center staffing pilot, we could push that back a year. But the others seem, and we could hold Walters Branch at what it is, at their hours, at what they are. That would give us a year or two to kind of look at how that library is being used.
And the engineering software too?
Does the engineering software have a long-term savings?
It's not that we can eliminate a position, it provides us more productivity, it frees up an engineer that can be in the field.
So it's work smarter, not harder.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
efficiency.
And I think they might plan on recovering some of the cost through permits.
Yes, yeah, there's a revenue lag right
Yeah,
now,
it's
if I
over,
remember.
yeah, over the long, so there's this one-time startup cost. To me, this has a lot in common with the forestry equipment. If you go back to page of the presentation, I don't have it, well, if you go back to page 5 of the presentation, at this point, we're looking potentially at a surplus this year. So anything, those kind of one-time purchases that make us more efficient or safer in the case of the forestry equipment are good things to look at for this year from a budget standpoint.
Yeah, anytime we can gain some efficiency now, it'll pay for itself later.
That's what you
So-
hope, yeah. I think they've really done their homework on the engineering software. And the forestry equipment, I mean, I think the efficiency would be in less downtime of the equipment, right?
Mhm.
I would imagine it has considerable downtime today. So that's not the kind of thing the document really captures, but it's another angle we consider when looking at things. And I think those are our only 2 one-time purchases that we have on this list.
So where are we at, 11, 12, and 19? Is that what I'm hearing?
So I heard keep the diversion clerk, cut the branch hours, keep them at the current Linwood hours. Forestry equipment, I'm not sure I have guidance on that yet. Engineering software, I'm not sure where you are. And then push back the staffing pilot versus call center.
Vice Mayor also suggested eliminating the circulation position.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry, yep.
So,
Just because it was new, if we could revisit
Yeah.
that next year.
So that's 379. So if we cut the circulation position, then we could add the call center staffing pilot back in and the forestry equipment back in. That's almost a wash, isn't it?
but manager's also saying he could delay this call center staffing pilot a year.
So I have, in my notes, right, that 11, 12, and 19 are what we're considering cutting for
That's
now.
what I had.
Okay.
That's what I do.
Yeah, that's what I had.
Okay.
So,
Any of these you want to test with public comment? Public engagement of the remainder? Or are you comfortable just going forward with these?
I'm comfortable going forward.
I am too.
All righty, great. So we have consensus there. So let's go to page 7.
These are the more conceptual items. The first list was the reinstatements of things we cut in 2020, and then the second list was things from departments. So these are the more conceptual ones.
This is where we get into big items.
Yeah.
Manager, have you been keeping a tally on how much we've saved so far on the items that?
I haven't, I can do that, but we're gonna,
I mean,
we're
'cause
not-
the
you're
items
not-
that we've agreed on so
Yeah.
far are fairly small.
yeah, right, exactly. We're heading to the big ones. This and the community initiatives, as well as what you decided to do on capital project. It's primarily the community initiatives and how, and you can phase those, right? So that if you keep, for instance, on this item, if you keep the ARPA reserve and then on the
Which I think we should
initiatives,
do, by the
reduce or change your timing on the initiatives, you probably can get there without, a lot of heavy lifting.
So, yeah, I don't know what, to get to Councilmember Sorrell's question, I'm not sure what we agreed on for table 3 and 1, but for the last table, it was 268,000 is what would be saved.
Table 1's a summary. You agreed to table 2 and table 3 as they exist.
Okay,
That's what I heard.
so 2 and 3.
Yep, and then you agreed to the 3 cuts on table 4.
So it's about, if the 2 library position, that's the library lines, 11, 12, right?
11, 12,
And
right.
then the highlight.
19.
So library ones together are about,
I think it's about a shade under $1 million,
Right.
850,000.
Yep, thank you.
Do we want to revisit table 2 or 3, now that we kind of have all these?
Again, even if you do that, you're going to be pretty far off from the number you need. So I think you're talking about it. First of all, these initiatives we're bringing forward, they're staff generated. So we're looking for your feedback. Are we on the right track? Is it smart for us to put money aside, for instance, to start implementing the results of the fire study? What do you think about the early literacy outreach? Elizabeth said that WSU is doing a study on that. There's over 50 agencies that are involved in early childhood literacy. Do you want to be involved in that? Or are we going to allow that to be with other agencies? This 100,000 would just allow us to come alongside others and to be helpful in that regard. Do we want to finish out now the second phase of the police staffing study? Those are big issues. And then the violence interrupter program is one that we've been talking about at staff level for a while, and I think I shared with all you the initial thoughts, and we've gone after some grant funds, but is that a priority for you? I want to make sure this reflects what you believe are the kinds of programs we ought to be pursuing.
So all these seem more, on table 5, we talk about police, library, fire, violence interrupter. They all seem, to me, more immediate needs than like the tree replanting, like purchasing new trees, which was $700,000 if we had to, I guess, find savings where, and I understand Councilmember Claycone's where we have to still remove the trees and make sure that they're not dangerous, but can we go a year, without replanting if we're looking at cutting or certain parts in the budget? That seems like it would be less notice to constituents than programs designed to help cut violence. So I don't.
kind of an esoteric argument, right? Because we're losing our tree canopy, our urban tree canopy. And so when I say something like that in parks, they beat me around the head for about 15 minutes. and I get it. I do get the point.
You're asking us to choose between police and trees, Bob.
I know. I truly understand.
I'm starting
that.
to sweat over here.
Yeah.
Come on.
Yeah. But, you know, they'll argue that it also raises the temperature of the city over time because we don't have the tree canopy, so.
Yeah, and I think the other difference too is the things in table 3, those are just reinstating the way the budget had been built. And then
Right.
number 5 these are some new concepts that are innovative and they also respond to problems or situations that we're dealing with.
But that's, you know, but your question, I mean, Mayor, you're right on target in terms of, you know, is it, you know, what is your higher priority? Is it the violence interrupter program because of what we've seen in the last couple of years, especially in the last 18 months, in terms of violent crime, especially crime against youth? You know, and do you sacrifice then, you know, for a year or two on the tree side or other programs in order to achieve that?
Did the fire response optimization, did that amount change? For some reason, I thought it was $2 million a year. Now it's $1 million. Did I just had that wrong?
It's been one. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So with so many other options for early literacy outreach, can we drop that?
It's a placeholder number now. I'm not sure what that money would be used for. You can surely revisit next year when we have a study and know what the gaps are, if you prefer to do that, but you could drop it for now.
I think I'd rather see what some of our other community partners are coming forth with, especially with their allocation of funding as well, from 259 and the county, WSU. I mean, should be hopefully more than just us at this table. So
Okay.
let's wait a little bit. It's, you know, look at our top goals. Community safety is one of them, and so I think we got to concentrate in that arena.
If you were to, we could, trying to think how to test. You don't really want to test, do you? Finishing the second phase of the police staffing study, or do you? I mean, you could do that. You could test the fire issue. You could test the violence interrupter program.
With the public,
with the public in engagement. Are there any items on there that you want to talk about through engagement?
I mean, I think that there is, with the fire optimization program, we're putting aside $1 million for 3 years, and we're not sure if that will come out more or less,
Right.
given. So it's tough to really kind of test that, because at that point you're talking values with people opposed to what we're actually, because we're just setting it aside, assuming that so we can take action on it.
We could probably put something together that would estimate how many positions that would create in the fire department in order to respond to a needs analysis that will be completed this year.
I guess just.
But you're right, it is a values question.
Well, it's,
Yeah.
But then are you committed to funding those positions, even if the optimization study says you don't need to do that?
It gets really interesting, because, and Fry brings up a good point, it gets interesting because we have, for example, if we are to get that 4-year funded grant for 12 firefighting positions for 4 years, and let's say the study comes back, the real-time, analytical study comes back and tells us you need 12 positions and we're good for 4 years. Now that money, that $1 million that we put in, it's pretty much going into reserves to pay for those 12 positions after 4 years. So I like the idea that we're being kind of conservative with it by putting money aside, but yeah, I think that there's some variables there that could change, especially if we are to get that SAFER grant or some of these other opportunities come. So I think that it's really tougher to explain when we're talking about priorities and values, police, fire, even literacy outreach, violence intervention, and then, all those compare or added up don't really compare to just the reserve funds that we have here. So it's going to be tough to kind of explain why do we have 5 million in reserves in 23 instead of 4 million, or why don't we have the 7 be 5 instead. So I think that, that's going to be interesting.
So let me suggest this, and I recognize this is a little more complex, but what if our engagement was around the community initiatives, page 10, and we then also provide an opportunity for any other initiatives that they feel are important. We could test, if you wanted to, mental health, substance abuse in that, and get them to prioritize among the initiatives. You can't we're going to supply information so that they can provide at least some educated impact or input, right? So if you narrow it to these 4 issues and then allow for the testing of a few other issues, that's the community feedback that you need, or a community plan, so to speak, that would help then justify the expenses you finally determine you want to do with community initiatives. Also give you an idea of priority, that if we can't afford all of these, at least you'll have citizen feedback on these items 1 through 4, plus whatever else they bring forward. Then you're not getting into the weeds in the rest of the budget and some of the issues you've talked about already. These are big ticket items and ones we can explain.
I'm fine with that. I don't know that all 4 need to be. The housing market right now kind of, there's not a lot of housing stock. I think that one's just kind of a sure thing as far as community need, especially in the areas in 1, 3, and parts of 6. I know where folks are looking at building those affordable homes. I think that's I don't know where folks would rank that, but that's just a need that I see in the housing stock right now. It's not really there.
And it's interesting when we think about these through the context of our community partners, where I think workforce development and training is high on my list of priorities, but I also know that Workforce Alliance has a $10 million grant, right? So what could we do, if we're putting $5 million aside, what can we do to stretch our resources and theirs if we needed to I guess, use collaborative efforts to cut down on that 5 million number in the future if we wind up where things came in and we needed to find money.
Could give you some interesting feedback on the initiatives.
It could. I think we want to think carefully about how we present them to not bias people. So, for example, if we left affordable housing in there, saying it that it's part of Places for People plan, even though we've adopted the plan, there's still some concern in the community about what that means. So maybe not using that because it could bias people. I don't know if the smart manufacturing digital transformation has to be tied to Wichita State University.
No.
So again, pulling out anything that gets people to think it's specifically tied to an organization or an initiative right now.
So make it a little more generic. We can provide some data, some numbers that, we can talk about. We've got some numbers that show the gap for affordable housing,
Yeah.
right? So we can
Right.
put those numbers in. You're right, we can definitely take out WSU and just talk about what it is in terms of trying to create new technology jobs, right? Or new economy jobs.
Right. And I think workforce doesn't have anything in there right now about any specific organization. So.
Yeah, none of them did, and I think that, I agree with Councilmember Claycomb with the more fluid I think these categories are, the more adaptable we're going to be able to be to the input we get from the community, which will help us, I think, develop some of our needs. Because when it comes to affordable housing, I think that that means something different than different people. We have a ton of money right now, resources being used to people who are in tight situations because of COVID with rent. And we know this is a separate pot, but we might have to explain that this is different than a WERAP program. So the workforce development, it seems like these numbers could be a little more fluid. And I think that having a conversation less about where money is, like, we're partnering with Wichita State for this, or less concrete, more abstract discussion might allow better value-based discussions coming in to give us a better perspective. So I agree with Councilmember Clake on that. Maybe we can be less directive.
What do you think, Elizabeth? You're the one that will have to implement this.
Exactly. So my first question is, would you be interested in asking people which of these categories is more important to them? Or would you be interested in asking, like, something along the lines of, we're thinking of, there's an affordable housing need, blah, 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 blah. Like, how would you like to see that invested? Like, does that make sense? Like,
I think and you're talking about the questions we ask the public?
Like what I'm thinking now as far as how we do our social media town hall, which is on Twitter, Facebook, and Nextdoor. So how would you like to see that work?
I would ask them to rank them. So I wouldn't say what is your top. I would just say, can you rank these?
Rank them.
I think ranking them is important. I also think that the type of questions like what are some of the issues that you believe get in the way of affordable housing, or something along those lines? Like, how do we get really good discussion? I think if you rank them, I think that's good to show priority, but also people who are more in economically stable situations, of course, going to have affordable housing on the bottom, right? So is our sample bias, because people who have time to fill this out on their smartphones might be of higher economic status. Is there any open-ended questions that we've asked before that can really kind of get us a better picture of what some of the needs are, opposed to what the priorities are?
Yeah, so that's a great question. We've approached the social media town hall in a number of different ways over the past 10 years. Last year we did the voting, so which is more important to you, trees or mowing, or library materials or library hours, those sorts of topics. We've also had Facebook Live events, and we've also had videos that explain the situation, and those require a little more lead time, but they'll explain the situation, and then we'll there'll be words at the bottom of the screen, and then we'll also have the question at the bottom that's maybe a fact or two, and then something, what do you think? And those, a lot of times, we get the most engagement from the easier questions. I mean, that's just the way it works, materials or hours, click, people love doing silly stuff like that. That's not necessarily silly, but just people like to push one button versus I've really noticed there's been a problem in my neighborhood with this, going into more detail. Even topics where we will say something like, do you think we have a problem with something? People will be, yes or no, or yes, and then the answer, versus something more open-ended. The feedback is a lot of times much more valuable, but it's harder to come by than the shorter responses. And I think it's probably just how social media works, right? It's not intended to plumb the depths of intellectual curiosity necessarily, but also the idea would be that we would take these same topics out to neighborhood meetings. Last year, I think I presented the budget at a lot of the advisory boards, like the park board and so forth. So we would, and then any other groups that would invite us to participate. I think the other value in having, landing on a set of topics is I don't think that the conversation about these community initiatives ends on July 20th or August 24th. I think this would be an ongoing conversation that we would have throughout the ARPA eligibility period. until we were finished with that spending.
But we do have some immediate needs, right?
Right.
And we may have the ability to fund at least one or part of an initiative early on.
Right.
So I think there is the need to get an idea of priorities going forward. And, what we can do is indicate that the ARPA funding is initially going to be used to restore services that have been cut and basically put us on firm footing so it doesn't have an impact on services or on taxes, right? And we could have up to $20 million in ARPA funds that could be available going forward, undetermined at this point. Help us determine the priorities for the expenditure of those funds. Our preliminary thoughts are these 4 categories. And then we could go ahead and then put some meat on the bones in terms of the 4 categories. And we can ask them to prioritize, we can ask them, I don't want to design it myself, but I think staff is hearing what you're saying. We can probably, you want an idea of priorities, but you also want some feedback if, I think at the end you want some feedback on are there other large initiatives that the community needs to address or the city needs to address because of the adverse impact of COVID, right? Because that's again the purpose of the ARPA funds is, and that's what we have to defend when we use those dollars. But we can then leave it open-ended after you talked about these 4 items.
Another approach too, we were planning on building a budget simulator, or we are building a budget simulator. It starts with the balanced budget, and then you can increase or decrease core services in order to prioritize existing funding. But that same software has a points option, do you remember that? And so we could have 4 options, so housing and small business, smart manufacturing, and workforces are 4 options, and then subcategories under them. And you could give each participant 20 points, and they would assign points to those subcategories. That's another option. And that would be more, I think that would be in addition to the social media town hall.
In this case, that would be the most appropriate tool from the simulator, I think.
The points.
The balanced budget part doesn't really work this year if we're going to zero in on the ARPA initiatives, the community initiatives.
So, just as a way to maybe triangulate the data of public opinion, and I don't know if this is possible, I know that last year we had a survey that was a scientific survey, it was long, it went out, and we got a response back, and it was pretty much overarching on people's, I guess, reflection on local government in general. I found that helpful because it was outside the realm of budget, but really did kind of identify people's attitudes of how they felt about our services and so on. Now, you and I spoke at one point where I think you said that it was a bi-yearly, every other year, and perhaps we might be able to do one again. I don't know if there's any movement on it or if we're able to utilize, have any funds that could actually produce a survey like that, which we can use as kind of a secondary resource with the budget similar, with how people gauge their needs for a city and expectations on this end, and then on this end through the lens of a budgeting process.
I don't think we'll have that data in time for you to make budget decisions if we
that's
accelerated it. I think we were scheduled to go out December,
Yeah, we
January.
usually go out in January.
The next
after
one,
all
and then the question
Christmas.
is, do you want to then do it again the next December, January?
That's what I was afraid of.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what I
it
was
was
gonna ask,
early
is if
on.
we had time to get the data. So-
Yeah.
Right, like it would, first of an extensive, probably
Yeah,
not.
I would
Okay.
think the soonest you could probably get it back would be in 3 to 4 months.
If we just dropped everything.
If you dropped
Right.
everything
Yeah.
right now,
Because
right?
it was sufficient, like it was like
Yeah.
it was quite
Yeah.
the study.
Doesn't somebody else analyze that data for us?
Yes,
Yeah.
we follow, it's a national service
Yeah,
that we use so
yeah.
that we know that we're getting a scientific survey.
Yeah.
Right.
And the nice thing too is there's other cities that use the same survey, so we can benchmark against them.
Comparisons.
Yeah.
But there is space at the end of the survey for custom questions, so that is something to keep in mind for next time.
But I do think that, to the mayor's point, if on those open-ended questions, if there's something specific that we wanted to ask, as opposed to just, what else do you want to tell us about this? But like you said, like what challenges keep us from, providing affordable housing? I'm just making that up. But if there was something like that you wanted to ask, we might not get a lot, but we might get some, and it would be helpful.
Because
So-
if it's too broad, I think that, we're
Yeah,
dealing
I
with this.
think-
Because at my DAB, I think the last topic, it wasn't the plastic bag task force, maybe it was housing, the housing plan.
Yeah, and they-
And the staff did a great job, but it was, what do you think about this? And we're all like, I had 11 people going on the Zoom going,
Right.
So we tried to drill it down a little bit for
Yeah,
them.
that's what I think you
So-
were getting at, right? To kind
It
of,
definitely was, and where I was, we did the open air ICT today, and it wasn't so much that the business community wanted the open air ICT permit, is that they presented like a problem that was perceived problem during that time, and then we were able to come in with the policy end to get it fixed. That's roughly is how do we get more kind of perceived problems, and I personally like problems, because it means that like I have something that's direct that I can try to fix, right? Like if you know exactly what the problem is, then you can find the answer to it. And that's what questions can we ask that would present, what is the problem with affordable housing? Like what is, and if you get enough, I guess, good, well thought out ideas with that, then that allows us to come up with policy responses to fix those. So that's exactly what I was hoping for, was instead of picking this or that, start that conversation where and it's skillful, because it's qualitative research, right? Like, so it's skillful how you ask the question. And, I think what Elizabeth is saying is that also our response will go down. Much engagement goes down when you ask those type of questions. But is there a way that we could somehow generate those types of responses where it gets us to another layer deeper than just, I think, yes or no type questions? I'm just throwing it out there.
I still think we need to do the rank order. I think it will give us information, and we need to ask if there's other ideas.
But we can phrase these, if I understand what the mayor's saying, if you can outline these in terms of the problems that we're trying to address, right? And so you're looking for their concurrence if this is a problem, and then to do rank order, and then you need to find a way to ask, are there other problems that have been created by COVID that are holding us back, or are significant issues facing the community, right? Is that generally what we're talking about?
Right, yeah. And then,
Elizabeth, got it?
I'm writing. Yeah, I think that if we launch the other simulator format, I think that it can accommodate what you all are looking for. I don't know that I'll be able to, I'll see if I can turn it around that quickly by next Monday. But I think that we could use those different, I guess you'd outline what the problem as it has presented itself today, and then offer some options that people could allocate their points to, and then have space at the bottom for them to present more concepts. Is that the general idea?
That may be too detailed.
Too detailed.
I think maybe it's a matter of, I'm not sure how we use the simulator. We're gonna have to talk about that.
Okay, but
Social media town hall piece is much easier than the simulator. Because I think we're gonna get back into the concerns that were expressed here a minute ago. If we start giving them too many solutions, they're gonna zero in on those instead of agreeing with the problems. Because right now, we don't even know what the solutions on some of these will be. We're saying these are the big categories. Are we on the right track?
Well, then I guess the opposite isn't necessarily to propose solutions, but to say which one of these problems do you think is the most pressing?
Correct.
Right.
And rank those four, and
So-
then allow for the identification of other problems.
Okay. That's kind of the opposite of what we do usually, right?
Okay, so there's some sausage making for you.
Jeez.
Okay.
All right. I think that gets us where we need to be. If you're comfortable with what you've heard and what we've talked about, what the feedback you've given us.
Can I
Are there
ask
other
about-
issues? Yeah.
Can I ask about CIP projects? Are you looking for us at some point to give direction on this, or is this something we also want to take out to the public? I don't know if we can. These are you know,
I think we're just looking on direction that you're comfortable with this concept of using ARPA to cash fund projects because it has an impact on the CIP as we develop it, because the front part of the CIP includes all those financial models.
okay.
So that's
Not
what we're
which
looking
ones
at.
we have to pick right now.
Yeah, we're really looking for, is that okay, Mark, the concept?
Conceptually, she's right, but having said that, at some point, we need to develop a CIP for you and include specific projects and not include specific projects, so feedback on that would be appropriate at some point in the not-too-distant future, if there's specific ones you wanted to see in or not in.
So on table 6, would all of those be able to be moved up on a calendar schedule so that they wouldn't have to wait till 24 to get done? For instance, like on the police substation?
I suppose you could, but also as a matter of capacity to manage the projects too.
Well, that's a given, true.
Yeah.
But funding-wise,
Yeah, if you had all the people and all the land and all the designs, I think you probably could.
you could move them up.
Yeah, the first, we'll receive the first half of the funding next year, and then we'd receive the second half next year.
Except that we're constrained by how much we get, the 72
That's true.
million,
On if the
right?
rules change.
And
That's
how
correct.
much we're willing to move.
Right.
Right.
So to follow up on that, if we shift the $500,000, that's the 2 million each year, that's our constraint, if we say 2 million is the right amount.
Right, that you're
Okay.
getting to the amount that is equivalent to that, yes.
Otherwise, we need to cut capital projects or we need to cut in the base operating budget.
If we don't shift this
If we don't do
$500,000, okay. And that is $23.6 million.
Right.
So that's what we've got to work with.
Right.
Unless we want to, okay. Okay.
You can add more to it by taking some of the community initiatives out.
Correct.
The community investments.
Or if we're successful and don't need all the reserve,
Right.
We
that
could
frees up
shift
more
things
as
around,
well.
yeah.
And that, yeah.
But you don't have to make that decision now
Yeah.
or even this year, probably.
And again, Mark, in terms of specifics, I just go back to the fire station replacement in conjunction with the fire staffing response optimization study. It makes sense to tie those two together potentially rather than cash funding the cultural facilities. Because we know we're going to have to do that every year anyway, so. if
Yeah,
we
I'd
can-
agree with, I would tell you that probably the most important considerations for you are hitting the $23 million number, but I would also look at which projects strategically it makes sense to accelerate, because we could potentially can do that. And we also tried to consider when we chose projects, ones that were in ARPA eligible categories. I don't think they have to be, but just for a belt and suspenders approach, we wanted to identify projects in those areas too, one of which is public safety, by the way.
Yeah, I think there's a reporting element too. I think there's a financial reporting and I think there's performance reporting with the funding that we'll be doing. So that's something else to keep in mind too. I'm not sure what that all will mean, but we'll be reporting.
Realistically, you probably couldn't accelerate fire stations because we won't have the results until the end of this year. And then you need to plan, if you're going to use those dollars for a new station, you need a year to plan. So we won't need that
Yeah,
construction money.
you
till
probably couldn't
23.
accelerate that one, but you
Right.
could accelerate the police station since we have the design now for East. That's supposed to
I
be.
see, oh, I see what you're saying, yep.
So that's supposed to be the
Move it to
model.
23 instead of 24,
Right.
yep. Okay.
So East Patrol is not being built till 22? Or I guess that's when it's paid for? I
That
thought
is
we were
tr-
supposed to start construction this year.
We won't be able to, we're doing design right now. We'll do design in 21 and they'll bid it out. It'll be 22
It'll be
construction.
22?
Yeah.
Okay.
You think 21's half over, right?
Yeah, I guess you're right.
I mean, it's hard to believe.
But again, with the design concept, and that's the model going forward, you could conceivably move the second one up if you had the land identified.
Yeah, we could do the new design in 22 Yeah, go out for bid, right?
Yeah.
Modify.
And do one in
design.
23
Right, okay,
or late 22.
right.
Okay. What else do we need? Do you want to talk about?
Bless you.
Staff, need anything else? Elizabeth or Mark, anything else?
We should think about getting a helicopter that I think you got rid of before I was elected.
I think the
We
meeting's
gotta-
over. I think we ran out of time. Thank you.
Oh, did, no, we,
Yeah.
we're done, we can't talk about helicopter?
I guess my response.
We've had too many helicopter discussions in the past.
Yeah, I was gonna say, that's been
Let's
a,
not
that
go
was
there.
a frequent social media town hall topic. All right, well, thanks for your time. This really helps us moving forward with budget development, and I'll see you at DABS.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
You're welcome.
Who has the DAB tomorrow night? Is that your?